Good evening. I'd like to call this regular Jamestown Public School Board meeting to order. It is April 18th, 2022, 5:15 p.m., and we're in the Thompson Community Room of the Jamestown Middle School. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roger, would you read the school board norms?
Sure. School board norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit the mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education. The last one is to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for staff, students, and the community of Jamestown.
Thank you, Roger. Any public communication? Does the board wish to declare any conflicts of interest tonight? No, there being no conflicts of interest declared, moving on to consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve? So moved. Roger, approved. Is there a second? Second. Aaron, second. Any discussion? Anything you'd like to pull off? There be no further discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on to our regular meeting, we have our fine arts recognition, and we're very proud of all of our speech, drama, and music students. Your name will be announced, and just meet me right over here for an item, and then we'll stand up here for photos. And we'll probably do the speech first and take a photo, and then the drama and take a photo, and then we'll take a separate photo of the music. That might be best organized.
Okay, for the WDA Conference Speech Meet Champions, we have Emma Willie in Dramatic, Trinity Cross and CC Molding in Humorous Duo, Anya McDermott and Daniel Nyland in Serious Duo, Ross Motter in Serious Prose, and Maddie Orr in Inform. For the state Class A individual speech champions, we have Paris Eastlick in storytelling, Maddie Orr in radio broadcast, Anya McDermott and Daniel Nyland in Serious Duo, with the state runner-up being Will Nelson, impromptu speaking. For drama, the Class A one-act plays, the state drama outstanding actors, we had Logan Motter and Benjamin Shirley.
to the music awards now. WDA Music 4-Year All-State Award, Kimmy Weens. For WDA Woodwinds, a solo star for Matthias Bercier, a solo star for Olivia Corinta, ensemble star for Ryan Wells, Kimmy Weens, Paris Eslick, Matthias Bercier, and Lauren Paterka. For WDA Brass, ensemble star Jackson Nauman, Zach Lundy, Allison Panchot, and Ethan Eigel. And all-state music, Maddie Tyson, Kimmy Weens, Olivia Corinna, Monica Ripplinger, Emma Wiley, Colin Conway, Paris Deacom, Tyler Peel, Ross Motter, Gabby Tweeton, Ryan Wells, Grace Hastings, and Matthias Bercier, with alternates Ethan Eigel and Lauren Paterka.
Thank you, and congratulations again. Very proud of all your accomplishments and representing Jamestown Public Schools. Oh, Jason, go ahead.
Let's just do a quick shout out too for all the coaches and advisors that were responsible for these accomplishments.
Yes, very good. Under regular meeting B, any correspondence? No, okay. And reports. Do we have student council report? All right. We planned this well, didn't we?
Yes. I'm Monica Ripplinger. I'm the executive president of Student Council. Right now, we are planning our Spring Fling, formerly known as MORP. It's the whole activity week next week. We're planning Mr. JHS, our little pageant show thing with the guys, and a dance. And then executive board elections are taking place this week, and then class elections take place in the middle of May. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Good. All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate those reports. Moving on, D, board education, educational competency, professional development. Joe Hageland, and he's ready to go.
Yeah, just get connected here.
That presentation is in your drive. I thought I linked it, but apparently did not save it, so. Oh, it is linked, or maybe I just didn't update my own.
Okay, just want to take a minute and a few minutes here and update you about the strategic plan and professional development activities that have gone on with the strategic plan this year and probably a little overlap into a little bit of last year as well. The strategic plan, as you know, we have 6 different initiatives in the strategic plan: academic engagement, personalized learning, professional learning and development, social emotional learning, resource management and planning, engagement in extracurricular and co-curricular activities, and then continuous improvement in data-driven decision-making. The first one, Initiative 1, basically has 4 goals: standards-based education, emphasizing choice-ready opportunities, Marzano teacher leader evaluation feedback or framework, and then improve capacity to support improved student outcomes in literacy. Goal number 1, this was the standards-based learning. We had a leadership team that was formed this year. We had an opportunity to get involved in a web series provided by the SEC and Marzano Institute that was led by the lady that actually is the author of the book study that we did with the teachers. But that group started meeting in November and had 5 or 6 meetings. We're still meeting throughout the school year. We have another one scheduled at the end of this month, or actually later on this week. That started off with that group going through the first few sessions of that webinar, and then Dr. Leck put out an email to staff containing some of the suggestions that we had, proposals that that group had made about movement towards standards-based learning and a timeline for implementation of different aspects of that process. Then in January, we devoted a half day of our professional development day to building level development of sharing of a PowerPoint that leadership group put together. And then it was adjusted to meet the needs of the different levels. All the elementary schools got together at Gessner and went through that together and had some work around that. The middle school and the high school met separately, obviously. There we did a book study at the elementary level and the 6th grade teachers, because those would be the first grade levels to move through that process. Did that, just finished that up at the end of April here. And then we did start some work on, we had our standards prioritized in English and language arts at the elementary level. So we started working on going through and doing some work with proficiency scales, deciding what would be proficient and how those would be measured. So we did some work with that that has just finished up last week, actually, with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade team meeting to go through the ELA's proficiency scales. So that's they got a good start on that, but that's an ongoing project. And like I said, that standards-based leadership team meets on Thursday to review what has happened during those proficiency scale work sessions and make plans moving forward and determining what our next steps are. As far as goal number 2, the Choice Ready, Adam Gaylor at the high school and the high school team has been working throughout the year on an innovation grant to address personalized learning and Choice Ready. They have scheduled 2 trips to view different schools in Minnesota. That actually, one is in April and one is in May here. Oh, that's Northern Casson, yep. And then the 3rd goal was the Marzano Teacher Leader Evaluation Framework. As far as professional development there, what we do each spring is at the end of the evaluation, after evaluations are completed, we put together a report for the principals, the administrators, that goes through and summarizes their observations throughout the year, which elements were observed, and look for some commonalities across the district. Oftentimes it shows that many of the same things are focused on at the beginning of the year, like routines and procedures, and then principals can use that to determine what their focus should be for the coming year. And again, it leads to some good discussion amongst administrators. We also working on creating a link between the Marzano elements and the Steve Dunn writing audits that we are doing at the elementary level. This year we finished our 4th and 5th grade work with Mr. Dunn, and part of that is always going through and doing walkthroughs of the school's audits to see how those activities, how those strategies are being used in classrooms, and not wanting to create another form that is separated from the evaluation, the observation system. We decided to try to make that part of the observations that principals normally do, and not just create one more report for them. Okay. And the fourth one is the improving the capacity to support student outcomes and literacy. This really came about from the Striving Readers grant that was started 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, and now as the CLSD, or the Comprehensive Literacy School Development Grant. And things that we have going on with that grant this year are the continuation of the writing, professional development, and coaching with Mr. Dunn. Did some work with guided reading. One of the areas that we're looking at was in that guided reading, it helps us to look at small group instruction. We had a lot of small group activities going on in our classrooms, and wanted to capitalize on that and put some more structured instruction in those small groups. Also, another piece, a large piece of the CLOSE grant is focused on coaching, instructional coaching, and coaching models. Again, working with Mr. Dunn, we did a lot of work with coaching cycles, and the instructional coaches have become much more comfortable with coaching cycles and implementing them in our buildings. And then the other aspect of that is for our pre-K, or our early education centers in town that we partner with, doing some SEEDS training. Lana Meisner was the coordinator for the grant until she became our EL instructor. So Lana continued to do some SEEDS training this year, and we're trying to build that program up and trying to get more impact in our early learning centers across the community. As initiative number 2 on professional learning and development, the literacy lens audit report was that first part. Again, a lot of these cross over into the CLOSE grant and the grant activities that I talked about earlier. You know, that's the one thing, one of the nice things about the things we've been doing, they cross over into so many of our different aspects, so many different pieces of our strategic plan that, you know, that it's, you know, it's nice to have those things connected. So one thing that we have been working on this year was right before the COVID pandemic, we had just started working with Michael Muffoni from Solution Tree on PLCs, professional learning communities. So that really took a hit during the pandemic with the need to not to social distance and all those types of things and bring people in. So we, especially at the elementary, that was very difficult. The high school and middle school were able to maintain some of those things, but so this year we spent a lot of time trying to reestablish those procedures and get PLCs back in place. One thing that has been really positive at the elementary levels is using one of the monthly PLCs for reviewing upcoming writing activities from the writing PD that we did with Mr. Dunn. Then we have goal number 2, which is looking at instructional practices and leadership. We started Foundations of Reading. We started participating in the Foundations of Reading course. We had worked with Shannon Harkin before on many different occasions as part of our MTSS project across the district. Shannon's very familiar with the multi-tiered systems of support, and is a contributor at the state level. We've had the nice fortune of working with her several times. She developed with the REAs a Foundations of Reading course, a workshop that emphasized the 5 components of reading and how that's tied to the MTSS layers or levels of support. So we were able to get started on that. Expansion of Steve Dunn writing. This year we, like I said, finished up with our 4th and 5th grade. When we started at the middle school, we had our middle school English language arts teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, participate in that project this year, and our social studies teachers at the middle school in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and had some very, very good results there. A lot of positive feedback and a lot of impact. Actually, we knew that the English language arts teachers would be supportive of a writing process, but where we really were pleasantly surprised was with our social studies department. Social studies teachers really took advantage of the strategies that Mr. Dunn presented, and both Mr. Hardy and Mr. Stillwell commented on how the number of times they've went into classrooms and seen those activities and those followed through in the classroom. And then we had the Teacher Leadership Academy. Dr. Leck has the second group, the second cohort of that just beginning now. So I think there are 15 people involved in that cohort. And goal number 3 is governance development. You're familiar with that one because that's the board education piece that Dr. Leck goes through, and based on those 6 competencies. And goal 4 is dealing with staff development for support staff. We have included the support staff in our back to school and our January PD days starting this past year. Last year, with again with the pandemic and the things that were going on there, we subscribed to Master Teacher Para Educator online licensing that has a series of professional development courses. And during the course of the year, we had 30 para-educators that had completed 425 hours of professional development in that, and that work was very successful. So we're looking at how we can sustain that and how we can use that for training new paraprofessionals and develop more of a structure for utilizing that. As far as the social emotional learning initiative number 3, the one that had professional development activities related to it was number 2, and with that again we had a MTSSB, or our behavior leadership team, involved in a webinar series that was offered through the SEEC. It was led by Don Kincaid out of Florida, and several things have come out of that so far this year. We have consistent school-wide expectations, built all the elementaries have the same expectations, so when we're moving from one building to another, we have those same 3 expectations, which are respect, responsibility, and safety. And then in each of those buildings, they developed rules or expectations for different areas within the building, what those expectations look like in the hallway or in the classroom or when entering the building, and different things like that. So that has been a real positive for the district. We also worked on identifying classroom managed and office managed behaviors. One of the things we found was that there was some confusion, some lack of clarity on, okay, what does a teacher handle in the classroom, what does get referred to the office, and trying to bring some consistency to that within the building. Each building might differ a little bit. Obviously, the high school and middle school have different expectations and different ways of handling things, but just, again, having that discussion so that teachers in the building, administrators in the building, have a plan for how they are working through those different behaviors and how they're managed. We also worked on identifying Tier 1 curriculum for social emotional learning. At the elementary, we're currently using Second Step as a Tier 1 curriculum. We had begun that a year ago, and then last year they went to an online model with that, which presented a lot of additional opportunities, but at the same time we found out that it presented some roadblocks as well. Teachers liked some of the hands-on things, and were disappointed that some of the online pieces didn't incorporate the hands-on. They actually, Second Step redid their curriculum. So we're still working through that, but hope to have and that's just not Jamestown, I should mention that. That was some feedback that they'd gotten nationally with that Second Step curriculum. So they're looking at that, and hopefully we'll see some changes with that as well. But at the middle school, counselors at the middle school are using Second Step with their 6th grade when they're doing their counseling sessions. And the 7th and 8th grade are using 7 Mindsets as their social emotional learning curriculum. And at the high school, they use Newsy LA as a social emotional learning tool. We also talked a lot about data collection and how we currently collect data. We have a lot of different pieces of data that we collect, but behavior data is difficult to collect. We use, in PowerSchool, we use log entries for teachers to record behaviors and make log entries, and we download that and sort through that and use that in a variety of different ways. It's a little bit cumbersome, so we're trying to get a more efficient model for that, so looking at different tools for that. And again, that team, that MTSSB team, is scheduled to meet the first week of May to, again, review some of those data collection pieces that we're reviewing and look at what our next steps are moving forward with that. As far as initiative number 4 on resource management planning, the only one I wanted to mention here was one that pertains as far as professional development activities. We were able to implement our LMS probably a little bit earlier than we had planned on because of the pandemic. We got started on that actually right when we went into distance learning. And so the summer, excuse me, not this past summer, but the summer before, we spent a lot of time trying to help teachers become familiar with Schoology and how that works and how that LMS operates. During the month of July, we had scheduled several sessions for teachers to work and get assistance with that. We had a team of teachers in the district that had got some advanced training and then shared those skills with other teachers and helped them develop that. So we had during the month of July, we had 125 teachers spend 558 hours working on that Schoology and getting that in place. And then we continued that with our back to school work as well for those teachers that weren't able to attend summer sessions. The initiative number 6 is the continuous improvement in data-driven decision making. Advanced Ed, which is now Cognia, is the review and engagement goals coming from that. We had 2 goals. One of them was data analysis process, developing that. So through our District School Improvement Committee, we've been working on quarterly building level data reviews, including data for attendance, grades, behaviors, behavior logs, and our benchmark data as far as reading and math. We also worked with instructional coaches working with teachers on FastBridge, which is one of our benchmark assessment data pieces on understanding that data and utilizing that data with other tools within FastBridge. And that was at the elementary and the middle school level. And then Renaissance Stars used at the high school as their benchmark data, as their benchmark assessment. And Caroline Thompson up there, the instructional coach up at the high school, is working with the teachers up there to understand that data and use that in their instructional planning. And then again, we did some work with guided reading. Guided reading offers us another opportunity to get some information about students and how they're progressing in those reading skills. The other thing with Advanced Ed, or Cognia, our second goal was a curriculum development process. And again, this goes back to that standards-based instruction project. Reviewing, we've had prioritized standards identified for the last few years. We've been working on those, but just moving that farther along now, and like I said, developing the proficiency scales for that, and then identifying resources and activities that support that. And our next step is looking at assessments that will measure that progress along those different various standards. One other thing that I'll bring up is the engagement review update. We had our engagement review from Advanced Ed, or Cognia, would be 5 years ago this next year, and we always are up for review every 5th year. And we hadn't heard anything. Dr. Leck hadn't gotten anything. So in January, we started sending emails to them saying, hey, what's the plan? Where are we at? Typically, they would send us a report that had to be filled out 2 or 3 years into the process, and just to update them. We didn't receive any of that, but that was during COVID, so knowing what was happening then, it was something that didn't happen. But so we finally just about a week ago here, got an email from Cognia, from Advanced Ed, or Cognia now, just stating that that our accreditation has been extended through June of 2025, and that our review will take place in 24 and 25, the school year 24-25, which puts it off, which is a nice thing just from the standpoint that the last 2 times we've done district accreditation reviews, they've been right at the same time that Cognia or Advanced Ed has changed to their new standards. They go through a review process every 5 years. So we're always on the front end of that. So we have our standards and our procedures that we start under one set of standards, and then the review team comes in and they're working off the new standards. So I think that this is gonna, I think that entered into their decision, but obviously I think we'll be going forward, moving with the new standards. They have a little bit different process in place. The district is assigned a liaison or a contact directly with Cognia that will work with us to introduce the new standards and all those requirements. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention, other things that affect professional development, that sometimes you don't plan for or don't see coming. Last legislative session is an example, state mandates. Science of reading was a big topic, and last legislative session, legislation came out with the fact that all K through 3 teachers and principals needed to receive training, professional development in the 5 competencies, or the 5 areas of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Then that was just one part of it. There's also a curriculum piece that goes along with that, review of curriculum that's being used in the districts. And like I said, that was the last legislative session. Just about a month ago, or not even a month ago here, we've got clarification from DPI with the interpretation of that legislation and how it's going to be rolled out, or how it's going to be enforced or looked at. Basically, some of the things, the nice thing with what we had been doing, the PD activities that we had started with Foundations of Reading meet that requirement for the science of reading. Like I said earlier, Shannon was very familiar with the state's multi-tiered systems of support. So, and she is very competent in reading instruction, obviously. So those 5 components and how they tie into to be sustainable and just became part of that foundations piece. So they started offering through the state and the REAs a Foundations of Reading course. It was a 3-day training, 1 day in February, 1 day in March, 1 day in April. We were fortunate, we were able to convince the REA to let us host that as one site. There were 3 sites across the state. We hosted that, and we had 57, I think, K and 1 teachers in this room receiving that training for those 3 days. We were able to get all of our kindergarten and grade 1 teachers and through that training. That would be something that, you know, we had planned and wanted to do anyway. So that isn't, you know, it isn't a result of the legislation, but it's just an example of how those things, you know, tie together sometimes. We have to move forward. We have kindergarten or grades 2 and 3 and Title I teachers that we would like to be our, that need to be our next focus for that. We have, again, worked with the REA and the REAs and secured Jamestown as a site for a summer training in August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We'll host a site, be a host site for that. We're going to encourage as many of our 2, 3, and Title I teachers as possible to attend that training in town here. And then in September, October, and November, again, 3 days, 1 day each month, they're going to repeat that training. And again, we hope to, and we're at this point planning on being a host site for that as well. So our 2, 3, and kindergarten, or 2, 3, and title teachers that aren't able to attend summer can attend the fall workshops in that area. And then we also have to address our K through 3 teachers of music, Phi-Ed, library, anybody that works with K through 3 teachers, it has to have part of this, some type of training. The SEC is developing a 2-hour online course that we're hoping to utilize to meet that need with our music, Phi-Ed, and library teachers, just to lighten that burden. One of the big things that comes into play there is obviously during the school year, having, you know, 16 teachers, 2 grade levels of teachers out of the classroom for 3 days puts a real burden on other teachers in the buildings and everybody else. And there are other opportunities for that. To receive that training, DPI is offering a literacy conference in July that has basically three tracks: a K through 3 reading teacher track, which is a 2-day event, a K through 3 non-reading teacher track, which is a 1-day, and then an administrator track, which is 2 days. We would like to see our teachers do the foundations piece just because it's consistent with the other PD that we've done in the district, and the same message presented the same way, and you know, content is always the same, but it always varies a little bit too, depending on the presenter and the manner it's presented. And then They're also developing 2 online resources. One I mentioned earlier was a short shared responsibility online course for music for the non-reading teachers of K through 3 students. And then the other one is a more robust online piece that's an option as well, that's scheduled to be anywhere between 20 and 30 hours of online. And then we also did have 2 principals go through letters for administrators. Letters is a course that's offered through Sopris Learning, Voyage or Sopris Learning, that, like I said, we've had 2 administrators go through that. We may have others. That's something we're still talking about. But the principal piece can be met by attending the Foundations of Reading course as well. And that's all I have. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them for you.
Jason?
I've got a few questions primarily focused around the Steve Dunn and the guided reading. So Initiative 1, Goal 3, the marriage or the link Steve Dunn audits to Marzano elements. Has that been done or that's on the to-do?
That's on the to-do. The
Okay.
audits come at the end of Steve's visits. So the 4th and 5th grade just finished that. So
And
yep.
then we'll look at maybe what you're saying is we'll look at what we're missing and add that to the Marzano, or how do you see that?
No, it's just connecting the 2. So instead of Steve, when he comes in, he wants you to look at 4 things on the instruction. And instead of throwing out another form to principals and saying, okay, now go in and look for these 4 things, we're tying that to things that they already do. All of our principals go in and look for student engagement as an example. Student engagement, well, that's a big part of Steve's work. And teachers are instructed how to use turn and talks and things like that
Okay.
to keep students engaged. So it's just utilizing our vocabulary and the tools that we currently have to meet, to check to see what implementation of that's going.
Okay, thanks. And with Steve Dunn, there was talk of expansion of his, using him. Is K through 5 maxed out on him?
K through 5 is maxed out? No.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. What we found out is Steve's work with the writing piece. We went through that for 2 years with our K through 1 teachers, or K through 3 teacher, K through 2 teachers, and then we just finished up our 2 years with our 3 through 5 teachers. And when we started working on the guided reading piece, the lady that we have that came out to work with us on guided reading, she's very familiar with the Steve Dunn process. She works in cooperation with Steve. She's actually, when we hire her through Steve Dunn. And when she was working with our reading teachers, our elementary teachers, one thing that we found out is that we need to reinforce at the upper level, the guided reading piece at the lower level was really solid in terms of teacher understanding those different elements and needing reinforcement with that and how to implement those things. But with 3, 4, and 5, we found out that that our teachers really wanted more work with comprehension and some of those more advanced skills that Steve touches on but doesn't get into real in depth. So we looked at that and said, well, as we move into the next piece of implementation of reading and writing and trying to improve those skills, we said, let's bring Steve back to work with our 3, 4, and 5 teachers on those areas and not do and tie it to the guided reading, but more focus on the guided reading with the K through 2.
Okay, that's a great segue into my guided reading question. I'm not confused, but I hear the terms guided reading and science of reading, and then now foundations of reading. From what I gather, the foundations of reading is tied to guided reading, correct? So far? So I'm just, what was, and Dr. Leck maybe, what was the genesis of the mandates from the state as far as the science of reading? I mean, why the focus on that, or even, legislative action?
Science reading has become a real, reading in general has been a focus with literacy for many years. And science reading was a collection of work that was put together that identified the 5 essential components of reading, came out of the National Reading work. And there was just a lot of push for that. States like California mandated it years ago, and the lady that authors many of those books, Melissa Moats, is a proponent, and it talks specifically about the different pieces of reading that need to be taught. And some of the things that we found out, and as I went through the foundations of reading, it was based on the same thing, those 5 different components of reading, fluency and phonemic awareness and everything else. As I went through that training, I was surprised at some of the things that I had assumed as a elementary teacher. I mean, going way back to a long, long time ago, guys. But, teacher and reading, for me, 30 years ago or more, was, following the book and doing this piece and that piece. And when oftentimes the pieces that, honestly, that I would skip were being some of those phonetic stuff that now we're finding out is so crucial to, especially to young learners. And I guess that's where the focus is, that K through 2 group. That, and the legislation, they're saying K through 3, but K through 2 is really essential. So science reading, guided reading, science reading, it's all looking at the different elements of reading, the different components of reading. Some of them approach it differently. But I think that, we've looked at everything we do. We look at, okay, how do we make the best of all the information we have and all the work that we get in the collection. If we have, just takes, Steve Dunn's work, for example. If we did everything Steve wanted us to do, we'd be writing, 6 hours a day. I mean, maybe not that much, but I mean, that's his passion. And I think that's the same for all of these. So our job is to really balance, okay, what's doable? And that's a big thing with Shannon Harkin that's really made her approach to the science reading and guided reading, really acceptable, is because she always talks about what's doable. What's doable? What can you have to make sure that you can do it. It doesn't make any sense to throw lofty plans out there and then not be able to follow through on stuff. So she really balances with doable. So long story short, they're they're grounded in the same research, just different slants on how to approach it.
Dr. Leck had something.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, you asked about the genesis and why is it legislation? It's just building foundations around one of the most important things we do, teaching kids is how to read. And one component that we don't talk about in this because we're focused on JPS is the legislation does outline responsibilities at higher education too. So helping to prepare teachers, not just public schools or schools in general at the K-3 level, but also in teacher preparation, that there is responsibilities at the higher ed level as well to improve, like we're asked to improve, but asked to improve the teacher preparation around literacy as well. So, we're building capacity now. Higher ed is doing that as well. So eventually this will kind of, we're collectively building together, but right now a lot of that focus is on the K through 3 teachers.
Jason?
So last thing then, And the reason I brought that up is because I know there have been some districts that have dumped the guided reading years ago for whatever reason, but I feel more comfortable now with your statement that it's rooted in the same research. And we've all been around education long enough to know that things get retreaded and renamed and rebranded, and it's really the same thing. So that was the reason I was asking those, so thank you.
Another thing that, one thing that, we often hear with the guide reading, and initially guide reading was the black, child of the, the blackballed because it was not the thing to do with science reading. Well, that has mellowed some, it's softened. And one of the things that we've seen is that, guided reading done properly, like most other things, it meets those standards, meets those components. But if you're just throwing guided reading out there and not doing it properly and not looking at the assessments and not dealing with the direct instruction piece is a big piece. And you need that direct instruction.
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just a general comment, the professional development activities here are just one small element of the overall strategic plan and initiatives. And I guess I probably a conversation for a future agenda, but just kind of, looking at how these initiatives were established and the goals and validation of those. And, is that what's right for the district today? And do we need to update those? But in specific to the professional development activities, how are we measuring ourselves in terms of success of these professional development investments, in terms of effectiveness, or whether or not they are effective, or if we're on the right path here, or are we just going with the latest buzzwords and trends, and that's just what's neat for the academic community.
A couple things, and we generally do surveys after completion of like the Steve Dunn writing and stuff. We do teacher surveys to get feedback on how they've been accepted by teachers and what their impact, what they view the impact of those trainings are. When we do things through SEC, which is a lot of like the foundations and things, they do those same type of surveys. So we get some feedback there about, teacher perception of the survey, of the professional development activities. Ultimately, what it comes down to is, how are our students doing on assessments, and whether it's our benchmark assessments or our state assessments. And, I think, our just initial review of our state assessment this past year, was our state assessment results were, we matched up against the state very well. We were at or above the state average in all areas. And that hasn't happened with us in the past. So reading was always had been a low spot for us, a difficulty. And the scores went up. Now, granted, that was statewide results were down because of instructional loss because of COVID. But when we measure ourselves against how we were doing with our peers across the state, we scored well and showed that growth actually from where we had been. So that's, like I said, ultimately that's where it comes down to, is looking at our assessment results and looking at that to see if we're making growth, students are improving.
Yeah.
Just a quick question too. The professional learning communities are so important in that collegiality. How do we address like departments of one, like family and consumer science, and some of those people who really lack a large amount of peers to work with on those areas? I always kind of think we meet the needs of the 80% pretty well with that. How do we deal with some of those other outliers so they have that collegiality to develop in those learning communities?
I know at the high school, with some of those smaller departments, Adam has formed PLC with just those single unit groups. Another piece of that is that instructional coaches work with those groups to try to help them with their standards and so forth. But that is a difficulty. It's a challenge. It's a challenge with, this year we were fortunate with our late starts to do some work across the elementary schools with some common time for a grade level PLC work, and that was real beneficial. So that I think one thing that we have seen with all the work we've done with standards and PLCs is that that idea of collegiality and working together is becoming not only becoming accepted, but becoming desired more than it used to be. It used, let's face it, when I was in the classroom, it was close the door and let me, leave me alone because, that's just the way we were. But that's changed.
Are there ever any options of having people who are those one-person departments doing things in the SEEC, reaching out to other districts and maybe doing some with people who do their same role and are maybe that department of one so they can connect or find somebody who's, and I know they do their best with combining maybe art with family and consumer science and something else, but.
I think we're in the same boat there with some of the smaller school districts around in trying to, and that we'd all like to, but at the same time, then it becomes logistical questions. When do you do it, and when do you have that time, and all those types of things. So you do it. It's sort of like try to address those things as they come up, and try to work on solutions. That's what we've already started talking about for next year, is how to, eliminate some of those roadblocks that we had this year.
Diane?
I was just curious about Cognier, or used to be Advanced Ed, pushing this accreditation back. Is there any talk that this is going to become a 6-year cycle, or is it just probably an impact of COVID, or we just don't know?
I don't know. Like I said, what we found out was that what I shared. I mean, there wasn't a lot more to it than that. They said that the next step would be that they would get in touch with us and lay out the process for us moving forward, and we haven't heard anything yet.
Okay, I was just thinking you might have heard something on the street about what's going on, but thank you.
Nope.
Any other questions?
Okay.
I just have a couple of questions. The science of reading with the legislative, is that annual training, or is it a one-time, or how does that work?
Okay, every year, what's been shared with us so far is every year on October 1st, the district will need to fill out a report that addresses those 7, there's the 5 components of science of reading, and there's 2 other elements with the curriculum piece and so forth, but that you have to fill out a report for each teacher that says what training did they receive that met that expectation or that requirement. So it'll go on for a while, and that's why, like, new teachers, how we develop training for new teachers. Part of this foundations training is that they're recording those sessions, so hopefully in the future some of that can be recorded for, if we have, single teachers coming on at the 2nd grade level, a new teacher, how do we, meet that obligation and stuff. So there'll be continued live sessions, but there'll also be other options. So it's an annual report.
All right, thank you. And then the closed grant, how many years are we into that?
We're in our 2nd year of the 4-year grant.
Okay, all right,
Right?
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's extended, and so, but we're.
And there was an overlap year and stuff. So,
Yes, so, okay, so we're well into it then. Very good. Any other questions on professional development?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hagelin. We appreciate your time and sharing with us.
Thank you.
Moving on, E, under regular meeting, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Luck?
Thank you. You have my written report. I'll skim through some areas. You see I have included the health and safety updates as of April 14th, and those are consistent with today. Some personnel updates that you'll be acting upon later in the board meeting. One thing a few things I wanted to make you aware of in terms of personnel. As the board's aware, we created a third section at Gustner a few years ago when we had a group, I think at the time it was 52 kindergarten students. So we added a third section. That's simply too many for 2 sections of kindergarten. I think we're at 50 now, but it's too many for the younger ages, but not enough that we wouldn't think about combining them back to 2 sections at some point as they got older, and that could be a little bit more manageable. And so we're at that point now. And another piece to that is we've looped that teacher. So the teacher that we hired for that kindergarten has taught 1st grade, has taught 2nd grade, would be teaching 3rd grade again, so that teacher has looped. We had a teacher in that building accept an internal transfer, and that's in your additional documents as well, which opened up a space at Gustner Elementary. And looking at the class sizes of 50, section 2, moving from 3 sections to 2 sections with an enrollment of 50, that's on the larger side, but I think it's reasonably manageable as they get into the 3rd grade, knowing that we might have to look at a paraprofessional maybe to help support. But that's certainly manageable to be able to do that, and that's the intent, is to move on from that 3rd section, go back to 8 sections as we look at right-sizing our staff every year. But when you have attrition in a building, there's also a good opportunity to do that as well. And so that'll be my intent moving forward with that section, moving from 9 sections in now 2nd grade into 8 sections for 3rd grade next year. And that teacher would just transition into that open 4th grade position. From the internal transfer, we have had 2 requests for release from contract. And you'll just note it's maybe more semantics than anything, but they're listed on your agenda as requests for release from contract and not resignations, although writing resignations, but the board would need to release from contract because both of those individuals have signed contracts already. Given the time period, even though we have an early year this year with the majority of districts not negotiating, so contracts have been out early, and so in the contract and hiring world, this is a little bit late almost, but I think there's enough, it's reasonable enough amount of time with both of those requests. My recommendation will be to approve those requests for release from contract. I reference later in my report here a little bit too that I referenced looking at right-sizing our staffing. And I think it's, again, in the next year or 2, we're going to want to have a conversation, whether it's the board's direction or not. But I think having time to look at and determine if we want to restructure our administrative staff as well. A few years ago, my recommendation was to do some sharing with administrators. I think that's still where my recommendation would lie, to do some sharing as we're looking at our enrollments and right-sizing our administrative staff, just like right-sizing our teaching staff. That would be make sense to have that conversation and make a determination if that's where we want to go, whether it's this year or a year or 2 in the future. I think it's, from an enrollment standpoint, it makes sense to begin those conversations, and I just want to lay the foundation that I think it's time to, again, have the conversations, whether the board decides to go in that direction or not. I wanted to bring the board awareness to some after-school program changes. For those that don't know, we work through a 21st Century grant. So we work with the SEC who writes the grant. We're a sub-grantee through the SEC. They provide funding for after-school programming. They've had a model. We've kind of had the Cadillac model in Jamestown for after-school programming. Most schools that are 21st century schools have only been able to do what the SEC refers to as a club version of after-school programming. So really a shorter period of time and less on, focus solely on academic supports. We've been able to extend that almost into a child care model. So operating a little bit longer. So, you know, for all of us, we've worked long enough to know that with federal and state regulations, those change on a regular basis. And as the federal regulations have changed, that means more schools have been able to apply for and receive funding for 21st century. The problem with, that's a good thing. The problem with that across the state has been that the funding has maintained relatively the same. So our per pupil is going to go down, which means we aren't going to be able to either fund as many schools or we're going to have to decrease the amount of time. So knowing that we've always operated with that childcare model that's extended longer into the evening, which is a nice benefit for families, but our priority, in my mind, is servicing as many students as opposed to fewer students for longer periods of time. So rather than, just to give you an example, rather than to only provide after-school programming at 2 elementary schools, I would rather provide for all the way through till 5:30, 6 o'clock. I would much rather provide an hour and a half for the 4 schools that are eligible. Gustner has never been eligible for the 21st century program. But Louis, L'Amour, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Washington have. So that's really where we're at. Either we want to provide for half of the schools for a longer period of time or all the schools for a shorter period of time. I'd certainly rather impact more kids. So I'm working with the SCC to determine how that's best going to operate, but the reality is it's lower per pupil, and something's going to have to change. So I'll keep the board apprised with that, knowing that that is something that the SCC writes the grant for, and we sub-grant through them. But it's something they've been great to work with, and they've been very communicative. And I will say, I think we owe the SCC some gratitude. They've subsidized our program for a period of time, just based on the loss of revenue. The SCC had to support the program so we can continue to operate this year at full capacity. So they've been, very good to work with for us. So that's appreciated. In terms of capital projects, that's up for approval in this meeting. I just wanted to touch on a few different areas. You can get the full breakdown of all the projects in the capital projects plan that are summer projects beyond the primary projects that we've really talked ad nauseum about at the high school, at the middle school, and at Gustner Elementary. But I want to talk, and I'll go through those when we get to approval, but in Schedule 1, that has added asbestos abatement. Again, this is beyond what those primary projects are, which takes a significant portion of what we'll be devoting. So beyond that on Schedule 1, asbestos abatement. In Schedule 2, which is where the schedule where you'll see the bulk of the work pretty much consistently year after year in building repairs. But there's a significant generator repair that needs to occur at Jamestown High School, various doors and window repairs and replacements across the district. In Schedule 3, extension of the fence at Lincoln Elementary. As you're aware, we removed the old transition house, and we need to formalize and put a long-term fence in that area for our students because they use that as a playground or will be using that as a playground. Schedule 7, a floor scrubber, that's our equipment. That's a larger purchase. And one of the things that you'll notice in Schedule 2, but it's in a few other places, one of the changes that we made to the capital projects plan was instead of listing out every little project, like $150 in tuck pointing at one elementary school, we've included those into district-wide allotments. So similar to what we do, think about what we did with carpeting and painting. It's a block of dollars for the district rather than kind of the nickel and dime at every different building. And so that happens, and I'll point those out when we get to that piece. And like I said, it's mostly on Schedule 2. One thing I did wanted to draw your attention to, when you approve the capital projects plan, the commitment will be predicated on a future general fund transfer. That's going to take a resolution of the board. But we've talked before about 70% of ESSER funding. 70% of ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funding would be approximately $5.5 million, and that's what this capital projects plan is predicated on, is that $5,512,115 for the primary projects at the high school, middle school, and Gusner Elementary. That includes then, that budget would include the remainder of the 2020 certificates of indebtedness. That is the refinance that occurred when we went through the Hanson Stadium renovation and the Erstead practice field addition at the high school. So that's the remainder of that refinance, and then our planned building fund revenue as well. I'm going to go through, when we do the capital projects plan, I want to just walk you through very briefly one of the tabs that includes the cash flow, because that is something that we have to look at in terms of cash flow and how we're going to fund the summer projects that are going to be done before all of the tax dollars come in, mostly in January, February, March. So we have to make sure that we have appropriate level of cash flow, which feeds into that request for 70% of ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funding. Two more things that I have, and then I'll hold for questions. Mental health therapy, you had board education from Mr. Hardy and Mr. Gaylor recently on the mental health therapy, and the fact that that's going very well, which is a great thing. One of the hurdles that they recommended that we consider and look at is, well, we're servicing 38 students, but we still have 43 students on a wait list, and what more can we do? I had a great conversation with Heidi Bedeau, and there's a behavioral health grant that we're looking at pursuing, and hopefully a portion of that could be used to fund 2 extra days. There's some assumptions there. Number one, that we would be able to fund that. Number two, that the village would be able to accommodate the existing, even getting 3 days was tough for us. And so there would have to be capacity with the village to service that. But we're hopeful and hopefully be able to service a few more students. We're seeing more students, and we're not able to dismiss them or exit them from services as quickly as what we hoped. But again, we're giving kids services that they need, so anything that we need to do there. The last piece I have before questions is just maybe a general overview. One of the things that you'll see, policy ABEA, or what it will be ABEA, that's our required wellness policy. A few different changes to that you'll outline in policy later. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is I think we're doing a better job with the wellness policy update in this iteration. One of the things that we've added is a building level assessment tool. Rather than in the past, we've worked at just looking at the district. How does the district do? Well, that only gives us a kind of a surface look. And so we're doing assessments at every building. The building feeds into an analysis of each of those assessment results. And then our wellness committee will look at how we do building by building, and then look to see what gaps exist and how we need to improve that from a district perspective. So I think it's better informing the wellness committee on what needs to happen as a district. And I made a note in there too that why the School Boards Association has recommended descriptor code changes. I'm not entirely sure what the rationale is for that, but we want to be consistent with what they've outlined for descriptor codes. So when you're approving those policies, you'll see the descriptor code changes. It will be changing the descriptor codes for the exhibits and the regulations that aren't included in that. We didn't feel like they needed to come before the board just for a descriptor code change. But with that rambling, I will hold for questions.
Any questions for Dr. Lecht? Jason?
So pending release from contract, will we post for Mr. Hardy's position?
That's the intention at this time. I think it depends on what exists in the district and if there's a better opportunity inside the district. But I think at this point, the plan would be yes, unless something else presents itself that would make sense.
Jason?
And then on the release of contract topic in general, you mentioned your feeling now is that we're within a reasonable time. Do you see other school districts or administrations, that word reasonable, I agree with you, we're still within the reasonable frame. Do we want to, do other districts set a date, or is there a way to quantify that so we're I'm just thinking down the road, if something would get a little more, tight for us, do we have something that we can say, this is what we've done, or this is what we've committed to do as a district, whether it's a date or whatever? And I know that's not the best either, but any thoughts on that?
So generally, my feeling has been, if a request for release happens during the school year, I'm much more apt to recommend a release. That to me is reasonable. It's happening within the school year. Once we get into the summer, usually my recommendation will be a release from contract contingent upon a replacement being found. As we get closer to the end of summer, that's where it gets a little trickier, where, again, if you do, my recommendation would be conditional, but depending on how close it is to the end of the year, you might not even be able to reasonably hire somebody, even if somebody was out there. And so then my recommendation would be likely to not honor that request. But I think it just depends. The schools do a lot of different things in terms of outlining that, whether that's liquidated damages. And I've very much been on the side of liquidated damages, that it punishes the individual teacher more than it benefits the district, and I've never supported liquidated damages, although I think you could talk to other superintendents that would have a great rationale for why it's effective. I'm just personally not there, but would it be out of the realm of reasonability to say, as a district, we want to adopt liquidated damages? No, I think it would be reasonable to do that. It's just not something that I've personally ever advocated for.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Dr. Luck's report? Okay. I just had a couple of things. The after-school grant, that's a federal grant, right? That SEC, it's not a state grant, it's a federal grant. I just wanted to.
Yeah, correct. So great question. So when some of these changes happen, they're happening to us. They're not necessarily changes that we're advocating for. In a perfect world, we'd like to keep exactly what we have. But in a changing environment with less funding available, something has to happen, and those are the solutions that I outlined, either having a shorter day for everybody or having a longer day for some.
And then we'll communicate that to our families when those final decisions are in place.
Yep, we had a great conversation with the SEC related to communicating early, often, as much as possible about how that change is going to impact our families.
And then my last question is, any updates on kindergarten enrollment? Has it picked up at all, or is it about the same?
Yeah, I actually had a note to remind myself to do that, and I forgot, but it's 94 now. So it was 77 when we met last time, 94. Still below what I would find to be, I think we're still closer to that 6 section than we are the 7, but we're moving along. So that's where we're at right now.
So anyone who wishes to enroll their child for kindergarten, contact the central office. Phone number is?
252-1950. Talk to Amy or, to start the registration process. And the earlier you can register, the better as we make plans. I was doing earlier today, I was working on enrollment projections. In that's a significant piece for the district when we look at when we did our, I went back and looked at our demography study that we had done in 2017, or redone in 2017. I think initially it was done in 2015. And everything was predicated on 160, an enrollment of 160. We've been, in the last couple of years, much closer to, I think the average was 143. It has been kind of our standard outside of a few high outlier years. That's probably closer where we are. So we were already running into that in terms of our projections. Now when you run into an enrollment that's likely 40 plus, less than what the enrollment projections are predicated on, and that's where, as I was talking earlier, we really need to focus on right-sizing our staff. There's things out of our control that we can't control, expansion at grade levels in alternatives in the community. Those are out of our control. We don't have control over what happens in another institution. but we do have control over some things, and when we look at right-sizing our budget around staffing, I think that's something that we do have within our control to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, moving on. We're under regular meeting, and moving on to letter F, nothing under old business. G, new business. Number 1, nothing under activities. Number 2, buildings and ground. A, is there a motion for approval of the capital projects plan revisions and summer projects? Motion by Gail, second by Roger. Any discussion? Dr. Luck, did you want to?
If I could, I would just take you through very quickly to walk through the different schedules that you see, to point out some of the things that I was referencing before. So if you go into asbestos' Schedule 1, that's where we would see those 2 changes, 2 additions at Gusner, and that's related to the primary HVAC replacement project there. The bulk of what you'll see in the capital projects plan and the summer projects for this summer lie in Schedule 2, that's in building repairs. And I'm not going to go through each of these. I outlined them, I think, to the degree that's necessary, although I'd be happy to talk about any of the projects specifically if you'd like to know more. We did, as a facility committee, go through them as well. But I would draw your attention down to the bottom, at the very end of Schedule 2. This is where we started to combine some of those smaller projects, pull them off the capital projects plan, create kind of a larger bucket for different areas like HVAC maintenance, utilities maintenance, emergency service maintenance and safety updates, general building repairs, that's a continuation, but painting and masonry maintenance. And I put tags into what would be column E, that you can see what's included in each of those different buckets. And I just want to draw your attention to that because that's somewhat different, and they're large dollar amounts that feed into there. So you're going to, just to be familiar with what draws from there. Like I said, some of it is just getting rid of some of that, $150 for tuck pointing at a building, or, increasing the number of splash blocks. Some of those, in my mind, don't serve a purpose in a larger, it gets a little bit too into the weeds, I think, for the planning document that this really needs to be. Moving on to sites, that's where that fence extension exists. And I did the same thing with sidewalk maintenance and replacement. We'll just have a budgeted district amount for sidewalks rather than what we did in the past, saying at this building to do this section. And it's going to be, we'll have $15,000, and we'll ask Jerome to address the areas that are the biggest primary needs. And I think it's easier from a budgeting standpoint for Sally as well to do it this way. Unfortunately, in the roofs, outside of the annual roof repairs and inspection, which we have budgeted $50,000, we weren't able to make any additional roof repairs or replacements work in this summer projects list. So that means we're pushing that down a little bit. So that means in the future that's going to have to be a larger priority as we work on those priorities that we already targeted. Nothing in the ADA schedule. If you look into the safety and security schedule, that's just a part of the additional scope added to the fire alarm and fire suppression. That's just a portion of that. And the equipment is where you see the scrubber replacement, and then we have some basic equipment repair and replacement. I have a dollar amount associated with that too, about $5,000. So with that, I want to draw your attention back to the first tab, which is the building fund balance. At the top, that's just as of April 1st, what we have in our building fund budget, $790,000. We're right after the point where we get the largest amounts in tax dollars in, so this is a high time for the building fund. We have that remainder of as I referenced before, the certificate of indebtedness. That's the debt refinance that we just talked about. You can anticipate a revenue, 10 mills, to bring in about $804,000. That'll include what will be our recommendation for Special assessment revenue, 3 mills, that's about $241,000. This includes in the transfer. This is, again, where the board would need to make a resolution to transfer that money when it's time to do so from the general fund, and that's about $5.5 million, mostly related indirectly to the ESSER programs. So that includes a total revenue of about $6.5 million, with really most of that coming from that general fund transfer. You see some other expenditures. We don't just spend on the summer projects. There's other expenses that come out from there as well. We had some remaining design fees for the primary projects. We debt finance for the middle school green space and for Washington. Next year, that'll be about $60,000. When you include our summer projects and our special fund expenses, that puts that at about $7.7 million in expenditures targeted for this year. Obviously, a very high amount and not typical, but considering the ESSER funding, we knew that this was part of the plan. That leaves us at an estimated balance on June 30th of 2023 at almost 1.1 million. But the last spreadsheet, at the bottom of that spreadsheet, I referenced cash flow. We're going to need the bulk of that money prior to the time when we get it all in January, February, and March. There's going to be the need to recognize that we don't get all of that funding until January, February, March, which is part of the $5.5 million general fund transfer. So that, assuming we spend everything, that would be a little bit short at $18,000 from our planned expenditures. But I think it's important to note that that's assuming that everything costs as much as what it's budgeted at, and that we don't spend, or that we spend all of our contingency funds as well. That includes about $300,000 in contingency. So I think we're fine. But I just wanted to outline the cash flow there as well. And if there's facility committee members that want to make any additions to that as well, feel free.
Aaron?
Just a process question on that cash flow. So these ESSER funds, we have to actually expense the funds before we can get reimbursed. So what does that process look like in terms of transfer from general fund to building fund and the timing of getting reimbursed for those
I'm going to let
expenses?
Sally answer that, but the turnaround is actually fairly quick when they're approved funds.
Yeah, and then in combination with that transfer from the general fund to the building fund and how that all has to be expensed.
Jason was talking, I missed your last question.
It was just reiterating the same question.
Yeah. The way it works, Aaron, right now, as we are expending those funds, I've done it on a quarterly basis. In December, request those funds, turnaround time. Once everything is approved within the month, we have those funds. I'm in the process of doing January through March. April and May, we'll get those funds. So on a quarterly basis, we are getting reimbursed for those ESSER dollars that we are spending.
So when we get reimbursed, does that flow into the general fund, and then we have to transfer by board action into the building fund?
Yes, these funds come into the general fund and by board action, transfer to the building fund.
So we'll have a series of these as we work through these projects, with the majority being right in the summer though, right?
Yeah, we'd like to do it at one time. And I think if you look at the informationally, we provide a general fund balance. I think you'll see when you get to that general fund balance that we'll be able to float the difference for that period of time.
Sally, anything else to add? Or Dr. Luck?
Well, if we would need to, if we would feel that to be necessary, we could split those up and make claims over time. But I think from an ease standpoint, we would like to do it at one time if we could.
I think from Dr. Lex and my, conversation is we are trying to get that goal. So what I would like to see, because obviously it's going to come to June 30th, the board meetings. Dr. Luck and I have had this conversation, and he'll probably, talk more about it at the next meeting. The board meeting is going to coincide with getting all the salaries the things expensed to get the budget revision ready for you so that we can do it all in June. It's going to have to, probably happen in July, or even a special meeting at the end of June, so, because budget revisions have to be done before the end of the fiscal year. So everything's going to come to head all at the same time.
Well, and we've referenced this before, and this is what Sally's referenced. We've referenced before that we'd like to claim as much of the ESSER funding as soon as possible. Our original intention was to kind of parcel it out over a series of years and claim it. We'd like to claim it all at one time so we can make sure that we're funding all of these projects. So that's why I'm saying I don't think it's going to be an issue to cash flow from the general fund.
Any other discussion? Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval of capital projects plan revisions and summer projects. If there's no further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on, nothing under curriculum assessment and instruction. Under finance, we have A, budget revisions. Sally, did you want to comment on that?
I did the executive summary. I think it answers the questions. The ESSER 1 funding is now done, so at the time, you don't have the exact expenditures, and federal budgets have to match what we spent, so they were budgeted in general fund. So this is just switching and budgeting them into the appropriate category. But all those ESSER 1 dollars have been spent and are in the general fund balance. The Title I, again, Washington, had some wanted, not issues, but they wanted to spend some money on licensing, which I've described in the overview. And federal, by law, we have, by federal dollars, the budgets need to match what we're spending. And just like Mr. Hagelin talked about, the reading, and when we plan this, Dr. Lack and Joe Hagelin and myself and other principals, when we plan for what is the best way to use these federal dollars, well, not everything is always in line to be able to do it by August, and things happen throughout the year. And so there's Title I dollars that don't have an activity, because we have to describe to the state how in each category, how these dollars are going to be spent. And so, the need for more reading materials, and so that just takes it out of unallocated and puts it into an activity, and that's what that budget revision is for. But obviously, in May and June, there's going to be a whole lot more.
Jason?
So the Washington request, does that go to the state too then, or is that just the reading materials?
The Washington, all three schools is supplemental reading materials and a math license in Washington. They all have to be approved, all of it has to go, all of it has to be approved by the state.
So is there a motion, do I have a motion for budget revisions as described and in your drive? Motion by Roger, second by Gail. Any other discussion or questions? Thank you, Sally, for telling us about that. Anything else? Okay, we have a motion and a second for budget revisions. No further discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B is general fund balance, and is there for information. Any questions on that? Moving on to C, monthly financial reports. Can I have, is there a motion by Roger, second by Diane? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Under personnel, A, approval to increase .56 FTE physical education position to 1 FTE beginning in the 2022-2023 school year. Is there a motion? So moved. Motion by Jason, second by Gail. Any discussion? Dr. Leck?
So a board memo, I just want to real briefly talk about that. I've talked earlier about right-sizing our staffs, and sometimes that means decreasing staff. Sometimes when you look at right-sizing your staff, you have to increase. This is a circumstance, in my opinion, and my recommendation is as noted in my memo to approve. But I don't think we were right-sized. And I think there's been a number of issues that have come from us not having a right size FTE in elementary PE that's going to long-term, that has created some inequities or problems. I've talked about it before, but just to reiterate, in our single section buildings, we have different teachers on Tuesday and Thursday. That's not good for kids. We've had a lot of windshield time for our teachers, and that's lost instruction time. It's certainly a hassle for our staff, but it's been, lost instructional time. Time they could be in front of kids is time in front of a windshield, and we don't want that. Another byproduct of that is that staff sharing creates more staff sharing. So the high school staff have had to come down and fill needs at the middle school because middle school has had to come and fill some needs at the elementary, and that's certainly not efficient. And I think we can solve that problem. I've outlined it in a cost analysis that you could actually save money, potentially, not that this is a dollar decision, but I just want to be cautious with that example a little bit because you're taking, at 0.56 FTE, a higher paid staff and replacing them with a lower paid 1 FTE staff. So that's a short-term cost decrease. And I've used the terms that that I did in the comparison just for the sake of transparency, but I think it's relatively immaterial of a change for now. But the other benefit comes from what we've asked the elementary to look at is, number one, that our PE teachers across the district wouldn't be in more than one building. We don't want somebody having to go to 3 different buildings. We want no more than 2. We want to make sure that that if possible, well, certainly that we're addressing the having multiple teachers, that shouldn't happen at any elementary level or really at any level, to have multiple teachers at any prep. But for the sake of efficiency, we want to make sure that they're moving to only 2 buildings. And hopefully with that, I think at the very minimum, and there's scheduling that needs to happen here, but at the very minimum, I think that we can address 1 extended contract. And that's ranged in terms of cost from, I think, $93.74 to $11,750 annually, that I think we can address by making this change. So you're adding FTE, but I think at least in the very short term, you're looking at a decreased outlay for cost.
Any other discussion? Any other questions? We have a motion and a second for approval to increase 0.56 FTE physical education position to 1 FTE beginning in the 2022-2023 school year. There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving on to B, approval of the release from contract for the 2022-2023 school year for Ryan Hardy, Jamestown Middle School principal, at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 contract term. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron, second by Melissa. Any discussion? We appreciate his service to the district. All those in favor, Dr. Luck?
I just want to address something that Jason referenced earlier, and the intent at any time we have an opening is to look to open that position. Like I said, unless there is a different opportunity that would exist or staffing that could transition, we would be looking to open that position.
There's some administrative moves that you could always make.
Potentially.
Potentially, yeah, whether a teacher or staff. So we have a motion and second to approve the release from contract for the 2022-2023 school year for Ryan Hardy, Jamestown Middle School principal, at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 contract term. No further discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Approval of the release of contract, this is letter C, approval of the release of contract for the 2022-2023 school year for Meredith Schmidt, business teacher at the Jamestown High School, at the conclusion of the 2021-2022 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa, second by Gail. Any discussion? And we thank her for her service. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. D, approval to hire Cole Ringler, at the agricultural education teacher at the James Valley Career and Technical Center, of a salary of $45,207.77 upon receiving North Dakota license and successful background check for the 2022-2023 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Roger, second by Melissa. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. E, approval to hire Marty Hochhalter as the math teacher at the high school, salary of $60,499.85 upon a successful background check for the 2022-2023 school year. Is there a motion? Motion by Roger, second by Gail. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Moving under policies and procedures, number 6. Letter A, approval of the second reading of the GCC Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment Policy. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Dan. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. B, approval of the first reading of the policy FDG dropouts and subsequent informational review of JHS school withdrawal/transfer form FDG-E. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Melissa. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Letter C, approval to rescind AACA Section 504 Dispute Resolution Policy. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Roger. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Letter D, approval of the first reading of policy AACA Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And then can we do these subsequent, or do we do separately? Dr. Leck, these two. With subsequent 1, review of Section 504 Evaluation Standards and Procedures, AACA-AR, and for information, review of Section 504 Notice of Parent/Guardian and Student Rights, AACA-E. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Roger. Any discussion on D and subsequent 1 and 2? There being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Letter E, approval to rescind policy ABCC wellness. Is there a motion by Roger? Second. Second by Dan. All those in favor, or any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. I lost my spot here. Where are we at? Okay, F, approval of the first reading of policy ABEA wellness and subsequent 1, approval to amend descriptor code ABCC-AR2 to ABEA-AR2 physical activity and recess regulation, and approval of first reading of ABEA-AR3 Smart Snacks in School with the informational attachment review of the ABEA-E Wellness Policy Assessment. So is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Melissa. So we are approving the first reading of policy ABEA Wellness with 1, approval to amend the descriptor codes, and 2, approval of the first reading of ABEA-AR3, the smart snacks in the schools with the attachment A. Any discussion on that? No discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Number 7, nothing under tuition. 8, other, anything, and then moving on, items for future agenda. Does the board have any items for future agenda that they would like on a future to discuss, or informational, board education, anything like that? Okay. Amy?
I want people to let me know what their thoughts are for attending the graduation high school transition GED support program.
Okay. Yep, and so we're going to talk about these meetings to be scheduled, and so Amy needs to know what the plan is for attending the high school GED and the transitional house graduations. Dr. Leck?
As a reminder, with the graduation, high school graduation, we've done 3 board members in the past. We've done that just because if we have all, it becomes a lot of hands to shake and a lot of chairs on the stage. But all invited to the transition house, that's worked out, and that's a wonderful program if you've never had a chance to participate in that. And then with the GED as well. And I know that Mr. Allen has expressed interest in attending the Jamestown High School graduation for his last meeting, or last time.
That's That sounds good. So I think we have a little time here, so I think we can maybe let Amy know who is interested, and then we can kind of, if we have more than 3, then we can kind of make a decision. If 3 or 4 works out, so. Okay. So meetings to be scheduled. We have the school board meeting on Monday, May 2nd, 2022 at 5:15 PM in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. Health Committee meeting on Monday, May 23rd, 2022 at 3:45 PM in the multipurpose room at the middle school. The GED graduation is on Tuesday, May 17th, 2022 at 7 PM in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. And the Transition House graduation is on Wednesday, May 18th, 2022 at 11 AM in the bunker, at the bunker. School board meeting on Monday, May 16th, 2022 at 5:15 PM in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. And JPS graduation on Sunday, May 29th, 2022 at 2:30 PM at the Civic Center. And then I think there is an awards day at the high school as well, the first week of May, and we can get that information out too. And the date is a little bit earlier this year, so we can let you know or send that out, that information out. Monthly superintendent evaluation is section 1, goal and vision setting, and section 4, curriculum and student support services. So remember to complete that. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned.